think stories do something to our brains. And I don't subscribe to. In fact, I categorically reject the notion that stories cannot have an impact. They do have an impact, even if you don't intend them to have an impact.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sohile Ali Show, a podcast where I interview interesting guests from all walks of life, each with their own stories to tell. It's my honor to have on multidisciplinary artist and executive producer of United States of Al, Mahyad Tousi, as my guest today. We had an amazing conversation about storytelling and the importance of representation. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please follow, leave a 5-star review, and if you're watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, hope you enjoy my conversation with Mahyad Tousi. Welcome, Mahyad Tousi, to the Sohile Ali Show. Thank you so much for spending some time with me this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you. I'm a huge fan of your work. I just want to say right off the bat, I was initially reaching out to you and your producing partner Reza Aslan as soon as I heard about you all's show United States of Al, which, congratulations, has been renewed for a second season.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the support. It's always good to hear from. Look, when you're in the business that we're in, even though we come sort of generally we come with an understanding of the communities that we take on at Boomgen. We've been around for a long time, and we've been sort of having a sort of very broad view of representing narratives and trying to bring stories that from the cultures of the greater Middle East. So, the Middle East, Central Asia, Central South Asia, North Africa, etc. Even with that, obviously this is a vast region, and there's a lot of people in it, and there's a massive amount of diversity within that. Even, for instance, with a place like Afghanistan, there's so much diversity within the country in and of itself. So it's always an absolute pleasure and a joy, and really a key marker to hear from the people whose identity are impacted by some of these stories. And so it's lovely to talk to you and to hear your support, and to also have an opportunity to speak directly with your audience.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. And I think it's worth noting. It's interesting. I was able to speak with Reza ahead of the season premiere, and I think it's interesting. I get to speak with you right as we're anticipating the season finale this Thursday, 8:30 on CBS. So sort of been able to bookend it with you too.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I can't believe that we're at the season's end. It's an emotional season ender.
Yeah,
I'm really excited to hear what people think. It's a big one.
just from the teaser last week after the episode for I think it's Help Comac, it just already looks like it's going to be an impactful one, and I'm very excited. And, if it wasn't clear enough from the support that I've been hoping the show means so much to myself, my family. We watch it every week, and I've been grateful and lucky to be involved in some of the pre-release meetings that you've all had with the Afghan community, and I've been invited to those, and just being able to kind of track it. I really was tracking it from as early as early last fall, as I had heard some Afghans had mentioned it to me. As someone who's interested in productions, I was always interested in it. So just seeing how it's come to fruition past all the concerns that early on that were had, and now looks like television's top comedy is really amazing. So congrats again to you and the entire team.
Thank you so much. It means the world. And
looking forward, as we mentioned, to season 2, a 22 episode order. Not to mention more that's on your plate, but what are you especially looking forward to with this next season?
Look, I mean, I think anytime you start a new show, it takes a bit of time to find your legs, right? You are creating characters, and these characters, I mean, you're breathing life into characters, and then between the performances and the writers and everything that we do on a day in and day out basis, these characters begin to find their own legs, and then the show begins to find its legs. And and have its own life, and um, it was, a network order normally is 22 episodes,
Mm-hmm.
and because of COVID, we had 13 episodes to work with in
Oh,
the
okay.
first season. And, if you look at the trajectory of what we've done, Reza and I, over the last, 16 years that we've been doing this,
Mm-hmm.
um, we've never done anything that's easy. Like, we
Mm.
seem to have a problem. We don't we don't do easy things. We always do difficult things, and taking on this project and trying to do something about that, that deals not only with, this longest running conflict in American history, and that deals with sort of this conflict in Afghanistan, and deals with also the fallout from conflict and war. I think a lot
Mm.
of times, I spent a good amount of time working as a conflict zone report videographer, really,
Right.
and going from conflict zones in different parts of the world, Africa, Middle East. I was in Afghanistan in
Documenting
2002,
these areas.
2003.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Iraq during the war. One of the things that becomes very obvious is that the way we talk about war and conflict is often um, simplified to the amount of people who die, which is
Mm.
obviously tragic,
Metrics.
but the true impact, the true cost of war,
Mm.
should be measured based on those who survive it,
Mm.
right? And the second you begin to think about the cost of conflict through the survivors, then you realize, my God, it's much more, right? If 1 million people died in Iraq,
Yes.
we're talking about 22 million survivors, for instance. That's a much heavier cost,
Mm.
and than the 1 million. And as
Mm.
tragic as the 1 million is, but oftentimes what is lost is the cost of conflict through its survivors. And when you think about
Sure.
survivors, it also includes the people who were on both sides of the conflict, and
Mm.
so those veterans as well. And so,
Mm-hmm.
we said, oh, let's what is the place to have a conversation about these kinds of characters and these kinds of issues, and you dream of that being sort of this kind of a time slot,
Right.
and that speaks to this size of an audience.
Right.
We are what, on an average 6 million people a week, that come from the parts of the country that we don't normally get to speak to and present these ideas and characters to. But as you can imagine, that's no easy task. It's one thing to say, okay, here's an idea, here's how we could approach it. It's
Right.
another thing altogether to actually have to do it.
And it's, yes, and it's clearly registered, as you mentioned, with this audience. And I, for one, being born and raised here in the Midwest, not maybe 2-3 hours from Dayton, Ohio, it's
Yeah.
clearly registered with this population. I see them in the comments. They're so attached to the Dugan family, and I think that's especially intentional by you all's part, is to tell the story. Really, I mean, an Afghan character, but an American family.
Yeah, exactly. I think the idea of taking on, I mean, the story of two people, really, it's set here, and obviously that is uh, that's the narrative, right? That the family is the home, but it is about these two characters who both of them are dealing actively with the cost of conflict, um, and yet we're doing it in a situation comedy, and using the form of comedy in order to do this, which is which is difficult for some people to.
Right. I mean,
That's, I think, a lot of the
serious topics
big
such as
backlash
this.
was like I think it had a lot to do about form, like how dare do you
Right.
do this with comedy. And what's funny is that, as someone who's actually spent time in conflict zones, including Afghanistan, comedy is what gets you through hardships.
Mm.
It is a sense of humor, it is an ability to be able to make joke and light, and sort of, that's how you deal with difficult things, is laughter and comedy in all these places.
Absolutely.
Like, one of the funniest places I've been to is Afghanistan,
You're right. Yeah.
because of in the way they I recall I had a conversation with one of Masood's nephews once in Kabul, and he was, telling me a story that was not funny, but I mean, I quite literally couldn't keep the food in my mouth because he was so funny talking about it. But he's talking about such big things and such tragic things that had happened in those last sort of few hours, few days in Masood's life, and giving me his perspective on how, obviously he had his own perspective and they have their own perspective, and everyone has their perspectives on it. Me, I was just interested to learn about about that perspective, but it's really less about what he was saying, but more about how he was doing it, and the levity and the sense of humor, even in his criticism of both the Americans, who he blamed, and others. It was unbelievable, to think about. All right, you're talking about something that is so sad, and and it almost seems foreign, even if you talk to people about it from that part of the world, because we normally don't deal with tragedy through laughter communally, right? We don't get together and laugh at a funeral, right? I wish we did. We don't. But that laughter is a key component in how we deal with trauma actively, and so it wasn't, it was a thing. It made sense to do it in this way, but it wasn't easy, and that's, I think, the point I was trying to initially make was, my God, how do you then do it in 13 episodes? Because you have to establish these characters, you have to create some continuity in ultimately 20 minutes a session, because this is network TV. About 20 minutes to actually do this in 13 episodes and take on big, heavy things, like have enough bandwidth, put the bait out there to get people hooked and really pay attention and say, okay, now through the character's journey, I'm going to talk to you about some things that are perhaps a bit more serious for this format that you may not be used to. So that was a big challenge with season 1, was that we had only 13, half a season because of COVID. 22 is a whole different ballgame, especially after you've had the 13 episodes to establish these characters and figure out how, with the audience, get used to this dance of, okay, here is how we laugh together, how we cry together, how we find these moments of humanity together, how we learn together. And so it's going to be exciting. It's going to be so exciting. But at the same time, it's, let's see what next year brings, because I expect we're going to be dealing with some heavy ongoing stuff that will, again, really test our mettle to navigate this. And we'll need the audience's support and your support and everybody else's support to help us figure out how best to navigate these thorny waters that may be this coming year. There's a lot to be concerned about in terms of geopolitics and politics in the region, and obviously this country is a we're in this sort of continuous turbulent situation, which doesn't bode well for anyone else. But so it's going to be interesting how we still have to navigate all those waters still. But 22 episodes, my God, that's a lot easier than 13 months.
You can map it out, stretch it out, and like you mentioned, the real life situation that's happening with U.S. forces being pulled out, as we saw in the promo, the end promo that is shown after many of the episodes. Now, it's more important now than ever to put this issue at the forefront, and I think, albeit a challenge, it'll be something you have our support every step of the way, and it's been amazing to see so far. So I thank you for the work you're doing, and I have been able to connect with some of my people I look up to in the Afghan community that are working on the show, such as Hila and Fahim, and getting to see their imprint on the show is amazing. I think it's clearly a record-breaking number of Afghans in a writer's room for a sitcom, at the very least.
I mean, I think what's amazing, and this is what we've always said, was it's exciting that it happened with the Afghan community. We've never really, we didn't set out to do either Afghan shows or Iranian shows or shows that had to do with various countries in the Arab region, etc. it was, that, but we knew that was the region we were interested in, and that's the region we come from, and that we knew there was enough similarities to be able to actually sort of
Yes.
do effective work. Certainly there was a gap, right? There was a narrative deficit when it came to stories from that part of the world. But
Yep.
it is so nice that it is the Afghan community that with this show, and because it is, Thursday night primetime television, and frankly, to have this many people, and and Hila is now a producer, and so it's exciting. Like there is more. Ariana, I think we go from 5 to 6, possibly 7, and that's not just record breaking in terms of Afghans. It's record breaking, period, in terms of representative voices inside any writer's room on network television, in any show that deals with this region at all. So it just happens to be Afghans, and Afghans are leading the charge, and that's really exciting for me.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I asked Reza when we spoke if any of his upbringing was brought into the show, and I understand you were born in the States, grew up in Iran, but I wanted to know if any of your experience coming back to the United States was pulled from for any of the episodes we saw, and Amir's experience.
Oh, I mean, I think, look, we both spent a good amount of time speaking with our colleagues and the writers, and our experiences are sort of part of who we are. So for sure, I think that the funniest stuff is the stuff that wasn't even intentional. Like, for instance, I didn't even think to bring these things up because I didn't think it was a thing. But like my first car was a Toyota Corolla.
Oh, yeah.
That I bought at the age of, 15 and a half, and drove myself to the DMV to get my driver's license here, and I was so attached to that car. And it was really funny to be like, oh, the Corolla thing was a thing.
Yes.
My mom's car was a Corolla in Iran.
Practical, long-lasting. Come on. There's nothing better.
So there was things that was surprising to me, so those are the things that I find a lot more interesting, is rather than the stuff that maybe was that I fed into the show, which obviously there are some, but the stuff that the show illuminated about me that I didn't even know was relevant to bring up.
Yes.
I came at the age of 13. What's interesting, I mean, I don't know if Reza mentioned this, but so I have the same last name on both sides, right? Because my mom and my dad were second cousins from the same family line. And so 50% of my lineage comes from these 3 brothers from Kabul who migrated to Iran in the early 1800s.
Oh, wow.
And it was something that, so I'm from, I grew up, my family's from Mahyad, from Khorasan, from back in the day. We've always been, my entire family is from the Khorasan region. And obviously, as that's if you think Khorasan historically, it also includes a large portion of Afghanistan, as well as a huge portion of Iran. But it wasn't until, I don't know, I guess I would say like maybe 30 years ago that I was told that, that my grandfather's, I mean, if you look at him, you'll be like, oh, for sure, he's Afghan.
He's an Afghan. My God.
And my, both my grandfathers were grandchildren of Afghan migrants who migrated across Khorasan from Kabul to Iran. So it's one of those things where, I've always since then sort of felt like, okay, well, it's a big part of who I am, because it's also big. I'm a big mythology person. It's also a big part of our mythologies, our shared mythologies. Between Iran and Afghanistan, like all the more interesting characters of the Shahnameh were always the Afghans. Like Rustam and his entire family. Like the idiots were the Iranians who were spoiled and continuously were too prideful and sort of blind in their sort of refinedness. And the more interesting characters were all the people who came from what is now Afghanistan, right? All of Rustam and his family, Zal, Sam, etc. And so yeah, so it was always like I had both the mythological framework, and then I
Mm-hmm.
actually found the personal connection to, and also I had the personality, because it pissed, like it wasn't a popular thing in Iran to say you're from Afghanistan, and therefore
Sure.
I would do it, just to connect with my family.
And how thrilled they would be.
Oh, but it was interesting. I was always an
Of course.
antagonist when it came to those things, which is sort of not
Ah.
surprising. I'm doing the same thing here. But so you could say that I was an Afghan activist from childhood, not childhood, I guess, from when my
Oh, come on.
teenage years.
We claim you. We claim you more than most.
But
It's
none of all
interesting.
of this, not to make light of the situation of Afghan immigrants in Iran, because it's atrocious and frankly disgusting. And I've spent time with the Afghan community in Iran while I was
Mm.
working there, as a
Mm-hmm.
conflict zone person, quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit. And
Yeah.
both the laws and the treatment of the of Afghan immigrants in Iran is nothing to be proud of, obviously,
Mm.
and needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, the genesis of the show, as Reza shared with me, with his meeting with Dave Getch, co-creator, wanting to make it about, I believe, an Iraqi interpreter. And then Reza suggested making it about Afghanistan, like you mentioned, longest running war. And again, for anyone watching, listening, that is not checked it out already, I encourage you to find it. It's available online. And as an Afghan, albeit born here, but talking to my Afghan family who have immigrated here, and so many of their stories are so true, and it's very much representative. And for me, one of the highlights, one of my favorite parts of the season was in the episode Sweetbread wrote, where a distraught Al has his arm over his head and he's listening to the king, the legendary Ahmad Zoyer, and to hear him on network television in the United States, my family, we watched it 4 times like straight that night because
Oh my god! Oh my god! That was
so
such an
beautiful.
amazing episode. I absolutely love. Like, my favorite moment is when they turn it back on, all three of them,
Yes,
and sit there
yes,
and commiserate together, because
yes.
it's
Oh my God.
that one is, I think one of the, like, some of those things, like yogurt, like it exists in across multiple cultures, but sort of this idea of lamenting in the blues of the
Mm,
music, and being so um committed to
mm,
heartbreak that not only you're not interested in escaping it, but as just like a good host, you want to invite people into it.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
He's
yeah.
sort of like, no, 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 I'm okay with my heartbreak. I want you to come and sit with me. And genius writing. They did an amazing job. Really, honestly, this group of writers
Hmm.
is breathtaking work.
Yes.
I was right there with you with that episode.
Yeah, it came as such a pleasant surprise, and even earlier on hearing Dari Farsi spoken as well, it was just
Yeah.
incredible. So all this to say, it's something I plan on supporting moving forward. And if any Afghans who are watching, listening, haven't supported yet, please hop on board because I know the whole team would love to have you. I wanted to kind of pivot. Oh, I did. I also wanted to ask. I saw you had shared a really special moment when I believe you had a 3 hour layover in JFK and
Oh my God.
probably tired and just ridiculous. And then you get on and the TV's playing US of Al and you found your name on the opening credit.
Yeah, it was amazing. I'm from, I grew up, the vast majority of my life I've spent in Brooklyn and in New York City. And, I still have a place. I'm in Brooklyn now. I still have a place here. Although I spend most of my time, because my kids go to school in LA. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
there most of the time. But I was coming back to make a movie here,
Mm-hmm.
and my flight was delayed 5 hours.
Oof.
I was stuck in LAX for 5 hours, exhausted. I get into JFK, forget even that it's like, it's you're dealing, just in a plane. I walk
Wow.
out into the platform, and all the televisions are playing the show. and I could see the credits were rolling, you know,
Yeah.
I try to, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get in there, I'm gonna take pictures of
Yeah.
everyone's credits, and I fall over my suitcase
Oh gosh.
and fall
The
on my
moving
ass,
platform.
recover,
Yeah.
and grab a still of mine and Reza's
Yeah.
credits
Yeah.
before like trying to gather myself, because it literally was like a Buster Keaton
Yeah.
skit. Like I looked like
People
an idiot. I literally rolled over, did a back somersault, got up. Like, did anybody see that? You know,
sprang
people are
up.
like, "What is this guy doing?"
You're right. Yeah. This guy is a big fan of the show. This guy must really like the show. He's trying to record it. Oh,
It was a sight, but it was beautiful. It was beautiful, delicious, nice. Welcome back home to New York. I
there
love
you
this
go.
place.
Absolutely, absolutely. I interned in New York City 2 years ago over the summer at the Daily Show, actually. So I
Amazing.
spent some time in the city and very much hustle and bustle all the time. So as someone
Yeah,
from the Midwest, I was like, oh, okay, this is how you guys are doing it out here.
yeah. My wife, and my wife's from Ohio.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Oh, well, there you go.
and so I have my entire half of my family who's from Ohio. And what's interesting is that I've had an opportunity to communicate with both sort of sides of the audience, you know,
There you go.
and they're
Yeah.
huge fans. Like my Ohio family couldn't be more proud and excited, and
Yeah.
finally they've got something. You know, it's really wonderful. They're in Florida, they're in you know, they're all over the place now, but you know, they're in Philadelphia, they're in Pennsylvania, they're in Boston, in
Yep.
Massachusetts, they're in
Yeah.
Ohio,
Yeah.
mainly in the South Cleveland area. That's, you know, where they're all from, Medina
Mm-hmm.
County, and my in-laws are in Litchfield, and sort of Cleveland and South Cleveland and East Cleveland, and
Wow.
sort of
So anytime you need something
so
Ohio based, you
well,
like,
it's really was
s-
like, all right, what are they going to think, you know?
yeah.
But you know, because I'd spent, and you know, we've been together, my wife and I have been together, God, for 21 years, you know, so I've
Beautiful.
been spending a lot of
Congratulations.
time in that part of the country,
Sure.
and obviously, as someone who comes from a very different culture
Right.
than my wife's, um, I've had a lot of bizarre, uncomfortable family situations. You know, like I remember, like, you know, I'd walk into a first Christmas party at my wife's grandmother's house, and you know, and you walk in, and I proceed to like go up to everyone and say hello to them. You know, one by hello, how are you? Like, introduce myself, you know,
Yeah.
or stand up when someone's coming in, or sit
Yes.
down when someone's leaving, and they're
Respect.
all couldn't like nobody else is sort of observing this.
I feel like there is something to be said about Midwestern hospitality, but definitely compared to Iranian, Afghan hospitality, politeness, it's doesn't come close.
Well,
But
it's not even, but it's just they're different. Like their
different,
whole
different.
way is letting you be comfortable. You know, like they don't want to
Yes.
inconvenience you.
Sure. Yeah.
So, like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't need to get up and say hi to me,
Yeah.
and you know, like, we won't get up and say hi to you. Where that's completely the other way. Like, I remember,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
like there was times when my in-laws were in DC, and my sister and them just had a baby, and they were over, and they were just dropping us off, or I
Mm,
can't remember what was going on. They were dropping us off at my sister's,
mm.
and obviously my sister and my brother-in-law were like, please come over, we're gonna make, you know, come on in, we're gonna make breakfast, you know, we want you to come in. And they are you know, they did not want to come in, right? They were tired, they'd been driving for a long time, they were exhausted, you know, they just wanted to go and sleep. So they're not going to say no, right? So they're
Right.
Midwestern, so they were like, of course. And my sister and my brother-in-law were completely unprepared. Like they were not planning for breakfast or guests. It's just what you have to make the offer, you know. And so it was hilarious because my sister was like, please come on in. They hadn't slept, they just had a baby.
That was yeah.
Meanwhile, they hadn't slept, they had been driving, and they were like, oh, okay,
Doesn't
sure.
matter. You have to invite. It doesn't matter. You have to.
Exactly. And
Wow.
then it was like, oh shit, we don't have
Yeah.
anything, you know. So then I had to run to the
Yeah.
store,
Go
you know, to go get stuff.
some tea,
So
some
to make it is
sweets. Yes.
hilarious. So it's, these things are very common in my life,
As
which is
Awamir
lovely.
stands up, he's standing because you're old. He's also dark. That's
Exactly.
lovely. Um, I did want to ask, as you mentioned, I don't know how much you can tell about it, but the film you are in the middle of production for remote. Is there anything you'd like to share about that, or able to share about that project?
Yeah, it's a COVID baby. That's myself and one of my collaborators, longtime collaborators, amazing video artist named Mika Rottenberg, sort of decided to take on last March, and started writing in the end of summer and delivered the first draft of in the end of the year, and it's financed by some of the biggest museums of modern art around the world. And it's a magical realism sci-fi, six women who live in different parts of the world, who speak different languages, connect around a sort of an online show of a South Korean performance artist, and discover there is a something unusual about the show that leads them to discover that there is these portals inside of their homes that connect them in wonderful and mysterious ways. It's a great project, sort of like, a bit of magical realism, a bit of sci-fi, a bit of art, and excited about what we shot, and now we have to deliver. We premiere in the fall, so it's all very fast, too fast. But again, lucky to be working, and lucky to have been able to write and make a film and finance a film in the course of a year, which is unheard of. And
In
yeah,
a year, like,
so
yeah, no, absolutely. Congratulate in a year like no other, and has filming
exactly.
wrapped?
What is it?
Has the filming wrapped?
Filming wrapped, yeah. Filming
Nice.
wrapped just this weekend,
Oh,
last
nice.
Saturday. Not so, yeah, almost 8 days ago. So yeah,
So
I'm
that,
still
yeah,
reeling
yeah.
from that. Yeah,
Was it shot in New York?
it was all shot in upstate New York and in Brooklyn. Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see that, as I've been following and keeping up with the posts, and as busy as you have been, being able to promote different episodes as they air. Like, this guy doesn't rest.
Yeah. No, well, that wasn't me. That was our team. Thank God.
Oh,
I was, yeah. I mean, it was in production. I couldn't. Yeah, I could barely had time to sleep, as you can imagine. Directing a film, it was my first time as well, and
yeah.
so that took a big toll. And but luckily, we have an amazing team, and Reza and I are able to do this kind of thing. We are to be in a team. We've
Mm-hmm.
been together for God, as working in this partnership for 16. Yeah, I guess we met 16 years ago, so
Yeah.
almost 15 years
Mm-hmm.
with Boomgen. So yeah, it makes it easier. We can cover for each other quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And do other things.
True partnership. I
Yes.
love it. And yes, I mean, I'm very honored and grateful to get the chance to speak to both of you. I was going to mention, Boom Gen and you all's production company, obviously wanting to put this certain region stories at the forefront, but also, as I've watched many of your speaking appearances and read about different interviews with you, this idea of unraveling the different avenues that can become about from a single intellectual property. I was going to ask if there was a certain technological advancement that excites you about being able to enhance storytelling as you see it.
I mean, I think the way I look at it is that there's a difference between story, right, and the mechanisms by which we consume or receive stories, right? Stories are big, um, they're big. They don't have they have their shape is large. It can take whatever scope, sort of like gas, right? It can fill whatever container you put it in,
Mm-hmm.
or it can be sort of reduced down to something smaller.
Mm-hmm.
But we come from a part of the world where stories are not some they're not secondary, right? They are very much
Mm-hmm.
part of who we are and how we relate to the world, and our understanding of the world. Like everything is through a story, or if whether it's a short story or an example, like everything is still very much rooted in narrative, right? We you know we, our grandparents, uncles, teachers, it's always stories, always
Mm-hmm.
stories. And those stories weren't purposeless. There was a
Oh,
reason somebody told you a story. Nobody was like, let me just tell you this story for no reason whatsoever, just because this happened to. There was
yeah.
always a reason.
Mm.
Even sometimes when it's a joke, there is something else to the
Some
joke that goes
truth. Yeah.
beyond it.
Mm.
For better or for worse, I should say. Um, and so so for me, stories were always a way of life. It's a way of looking at the world, and I never sort of got on the bandwagon of story being defined by the plumbing by which you receive it, right? So film or television, these are plumbing, right?
Mm.
um,
Mm.
they are economic models through which a story is molded and delivered. It has to be, because you need economics to create it, to hire people, to pay people, to distribute it, etc.
Vehicles.
And so those are great things that one needs in order to be able to do the work,
Mm.
but they don't define story. And
Mm.
so if you think of story in a bigger sense, right, a story that sits above the various different ways one may receive a story, you'll often find that story um, has could some stories, I mean, some stories don't, but that story can exist beyond a single delivery mechanism, right?
Mm.
um, and it often does. So even if you think of a TV show, like let's say United States of Al,
Mm-hmm.
we're making a TV show. We had, it's a network show. We knew what the time slot was. We knew how much time we had. How much time we had to allot for commercials, where the act breaks. Very
Mm-hmm.
specific, right? It's a very specific form and what you have to deliver, etc.
Mm.
But there is marketing materials and trailers and
Mm.
images and articles and conversation podcasts. All of these things are also ways of communicating different aspects of the same story. And so the second you think of story as bigger than just the one way in which, the biggest way or the more mainstream way or the most common way people may receive it, you begin to look at this broader sense of what stories are, and you take those opportunities. There's only so much we can do in 22 minutes. But even, for instance, you mentioned in the beginning of the season, for instance, a lot of the reaction at the time, some of it was negative, had to do with the marketing material, right? They had received the marketing material, and so the audience is correct, because they're saying this is also the story, right? Now we can say, hey, but that's not the actual show, but they're correct, because it is also part of the story. And it is incumbent on us to look at it all as a story. Sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can't, because marketing is marketing, right? They're targeting it towards a specific audience to turn eyeballs. But the reason why some people react negatively to a marketing material is because they correctly identify it as story, as part of the story. And so is our way of engaging with the audience in the aftermath. What are the articles that we say? How do we talk about the show? How do we use the opportunity of this show to educate people about what's going on right now and how it relates to actual real events? Its story is neither fiction or nonfiction. It's both, like United States of Al is a fiction show, but we have now are in a conversation that is not fictional at all. There are people who live this life and are impacted by the current state of politics and decisions that are being made as we speak, on a policy level, both here in Afghanistan, right? And and that's real. That's not fictional, right? So so that's, so I think the way I've always advocated for people to look at stories is as much bigger than sort of just, and the opportunity is much bigger. I sort of have committed my life to being very intentional about every aspect of the story, and looking at it all as the story. What are the articles that are written? What is the conversation that is being had? How do you curate that conversation? Like you talked about that event early on with the Afghan community, which was, which had been in the works for some time, and it was the second one that we'd done, and sort of like, what do we show, and how do we talk about it, and who is there to talk, and that's also part of the story, right? It was also part of the story of the show. And so yeah, so that's, I think, the way I look at it. Beyond that, I very early in my life, I came across, I was in Iran, obviously, growing up in the middle of the war. There was daily bombing raids, and there was like food ration lines, and it was a weird sort of situation, to be growing up in post-revolution, right? It's like a revolution followed by a war. It's rare occurrences in human history, and here I was, that was just normal, you know. And I found a copy of Gone with the Wind, Barbad Rafte, the novel, and started reading it at the age of 9. I think I was 9, 10. And your parents don't know how to, like, first of all, parents back then, right now, like, there's so much conversation and discussion with kids. Back then, you were just like going for the ride. um, but even if they wanted to have a conversation, how do you talk to your child about, okay, what does it mean, a revolution, another revolution on top of it, and then a war? What does it all mean? Like, you don't know what to say. You're just dealing with the situation. um, so it was weirdly in that book that I found some answers. Now, here was a woman. So because my family was relatively well-to-do, we weren't uber rich in any way, but we were well off. My Afghan, the two Afghan brothers, especially one of them, did quite well. He became, he had a lot of land in across Khorasan, and so we were doing fine before the revolution. When the revolution happened, obviously the situation turned upside down, and suddenly the rhetoric of the Iranian Revolution was that if you were well-to-do before the revolution, then you're somehow were the problem, right? So as a kid, trying to, okay, so I was on the, you know, I represented what was bad according to sort of the revolutionary rhetoric and post-revolutionary Iran, my family. Um, and there was this upheaval of economics, and sort of everything was changing. And then there was this war that was being fought. Um, and then how was I supposed to feel about that, etc. All of those things. And I read this one book, which is about this woman. It's a romance novel that takes place during a conflict that had complete social transformation of the South. She was on the wrong side of the war. And so I was like, suddenly it was like, oh my God, like I understand, and that's the power of story, right? The kid, a 9-year-old kid in Iran connects with Scarlett O'Hara, a fictional character in the American South, in a novel about the American Civil War, which is, but and I remember reading that book and getting to the end of it and like being completely pissed off that there was not more. That's it. That's the end of the novel. And I'm like, I want more. I wanted to know. There was so much missing. Like I was confronted by this grand epic that had giant holes for me, and one of those holes was Mammy, so the woman who worked in the household, who had her own family and children, although they were completely background in a novel. And here she is working loyal to this woman in the conflict that's being fought supposedly on behalf of her race, to emancipate her from her situation, because no doubt she was a slave. Um, and yet the story sort of completely brushed aside that part of it, and I wanted to read another entire book that told me the whole thing from her perspective, you know and I've always been fascinated. It was, as a kid, it was like what I wanted, and I kept talking about it as a kid. And then growing up, I would think about Gone with the Wind, which is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, to this day, corrected for inflation, the most successful entertainment franchise in history. Like bigger than Avatar, bigger than all of them, because
Right, because the movie and the book.
huge, right?
Yeah.
And imagine if there was another novel that told that story from Mammy's perspective. Imagine the cultural significance it would have had now, the conversation that we're having still, if that same story was told from the perspective of that family and what it meant to them, and how that would have informed us, and who should have written that, and all of those things, to this day, it's like my secret wish is someone to take that on and say, you know what, we're going to tell the story of Mammy and her family in that setting, and just imagine what that would do to that story. So yeah, I think stories present a tremendous amount of opportunity. The question is, how do you economize around those opportunities, and how do you find ways to pay for the stories to be expanded in this way, so that you can dramatically improve their social impact. And to me, that's really, really important, because for me, I've never thought of entertainment as in and of itself as just entertainment. My relationship with stories were never one where, here's a story just for fun, right? There was always a reason. And I think they mean something. I think stories do something to our brains. And I don't subscribe to, in fact, I categorically reject the notion that stories cannot have an impact. They do have an impact, even if you don't intend them to have an impact. And they have a negative impact a lot of times when you ignore the fact that they have an impact. If you think they don't have an impact, then you tend to often make decisions that will have a negative impact. And then, and whether you're aware of it or not, whether you are held accountable to it or not, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to put stuff in the world that's going to make the world a worse place, to hurt people, etc. So I think thinking about stories in an expanded form provides a much greater runway to do the right thing, to make the right kind of impact, to take on things, because you can't necessarily do it. Like, in our 22 minutes, we can only do so much.
Yes.
If we had a second canvas, for instance, right? If you could also do a podcast, or if you could also put out a comic book that had to do with, another story thread that had to do with the United States of Al storyline that took place in Afghanistan, for instance.
Yes. Yes.
That would be amazing. And then suddenly you'd get a different scope. Yeah, we can't go and shoot in Afghanistan right now, but we could do a comic book, for instance.
Yep. Animation.
Or,
yep.
You know what I mean? So that's sort of the stuff that gets me excited, and but the challenge is always, how do you economize it, and how do you pay for it,
Yes. I mean, I find your whole approach to the holistic story, both story and the telling, it's fascinating, and it really does. It opened my eyes to, I always heard, show business, but it's 50% show, 50% business. So you must be able to understand all these aspects. And having taken some classes with film producers that have come to my university, what your notion, your principles, they stand so true in practice. So it's really great to hear that from your own words. I wanted to slowly wrap up with a question about your Starfish Accelerator program, which is, in your own words, how would you describe this program?
So Starfish is a sort of the answer to, for a long time we focused entirely on communities much like our own, and then we realized that we're all, that because the obstacles that exist in the entertainment industry, in the storytelling industry, right, in the
Mm-hmm.
culture industry, if you would,
Mm-hmm.
are systemic. That the obstacles to people of color, to BIPOC artists, is the same. And so
Yes.
if I have learned lessons that would help me, yes, they can help perhaps you or other people who come from this same part of the world as I come from, but they
Absolutely.
can also help other people from other communities, and their lessons can help my community. And by separating ourselves, I realized a long time is that if you're an activist, you need to work within silos, right? You work on Islamophobia or Afghan issues or issues relating to Iran human rights stuff, or or your sort of work on Latinx issues, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But as an artist, your role is different than an activist, right? And our job is to tell stories that prepare mainstream culture, or culture that is defined so much by big narratives, to
Mm-hmm.
be recipient of what activism tells them, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be willing to receive, to hear why this issue is important. That's what the story does. Like United States of Al isn't going to,
Right.
we're not going to go out there and lobby for policies to be changed, let's say vis-a-vis the SIV program. But what we can do is change the cultural milieu so that the person, the activist who's on the ground, who is making that case, can be more effective, right?
Make their job
And
easier.
that,
Perceptions.
because public opinion shifts around that issue. Even the people who are in the business of making these decisions are
Mm-hmm.
now, you know,
Yes.
have
Consuming
greater
it.
exposure.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bigger spotlight on them, etc. So that's our role as artists, is to do that kind of work. And I think what we wanted to do with Starfish was, how do we create an accelerator, very much like a tech style accelerator, that really took these principles of multi-platform storytelling that we were talking about, to address the narrative deficit disorder that exists in this country, especially around representation, around narratives from BIPOC communities, and to not and to say, you know what, this is an organization that's served to activate and accelerate big pop culture ideas from proven artists from these BIPOC communities, and creates a methodology and sense of community, with support from philanthropy. So George Duke and Pop Culture Collaborative and Pillars Fund and the Lin-Manuel Miranda Family Foundation, to really support us in putting together a methodology that supports BIPOC artists to seed and then launch big pop culture ideas in the biggest way possible. So it's super excited. We're just wrapping up the pilot year. We're about to go into doing our second year with 6 new projects, and can't be more excited.
That's fantastic. And congratulations on a successful year. And as an Afghan Muslim, I'm 23 years old, someone aspiring to tell my own stories and the stories of those around me. It's very inspiring and encouraging to see individuals like yourself who have paved the way, who have gone in through the trenches, got to understand the ins and outs, and are still there advocating for the next generation. And that's very encouraging, inspiring, like I mentioned. So
that's a really nice way of telling me I'm really fucking old. I appreciate that.
Hey, I always try. Reza, at the beginning, you said I feel stupid and old. I said I met you when I was 8.
You
Reza.
old fart.
I
I'm
can't
so glad.
tell you. At least I didn't meet you when I was 8. That'd be
But since you're Afghan, I know you. At least you respect your elders.
Exactly. I would stand exactly. But my final question for you, Mahyad, is who or what continues to inspire you today?
Oh God. I mean, in this moment in time, I think Black women, really. There's so many Black women doing amazing work, and it's interesting. Like you think about struggle and the will that it takes to transform struggle and strife into community and power and resilience. And that is always sort of the most inspiring thing to see, at any time, in any circumstance. So if you even go back in history and think about, all right, who has been able to do this kind of thing, it's always those people who are so inspiring to me. And right now, in this moment, it's in this crisis that we feel in this country, Black women are, so many of them, both at a local level, at a community level, on a state level, at a national level, who are doing some of the most important work, most inspiring work. And that's really who inspires me, I would say. That's who I learn from. That's who I listen to. I think that's they're going to lead us out of this mess, hopefully.
Absolutely.
It's unfortunate that they have to do it, of all people, but because they've already have had to carry so much, but nonetheless, we need them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Mahyad Tousi, for your time this afternoon. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing many of the projects that you're working on currently and in the future.
The pleasure and honor is all mine. Thank you for having me, Sohile John.
Real quick, before you click away, thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Click right here to subscribe to my channel for all future videos, and click right here to check out this video over here. Have a great one.